Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we believe mental illness can be temporary and transformative. Stay tuned for innovative, effective tools from experts in the field of mental health. Hosted by Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist. This podcast aims to change the narrative around mental illness. Move from a place of fear to a place of hope and solutions. Here on Your Mind.
Dr. MaryCatherine McDonald is a Ph.D. researcher, author, and trauma specialist with over 15 years of experience. She has written extensively about trauma, grief, and the power of the human spirit to heal. Through her writing, courses, and coaching, she helps people reframe trauma from a strength-based perspective and reclaim joy after hardship. Her latest book, The Joy Reset, explores barriers that prevent us from accessing joy and how to recalibrate in order to welcome back positive emotions. When she's not working, she can be found dancing in the kitchen, walking in nature, or helping others rediscover their inner light. Hello. Thank you for joining me. It's delightful to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
I'm hoping you can get us started by telling us a little bit about how you got into the work you're doing and what drives your passion for it.
Yes. So I would love to tell you this sort of organized story that I set out to do exactly what I'm doing right now. But as you probably know, many stories are not like that. In fact, I'm not sure I know of a single story like that. My story is bumpy and rambly and random. So I started in the field of the philosophy of psychology. So I was looking critically at psychology and how the field, sort of the history of psychology, how we define certain mental illnesses, what we have done right, what we've done wrong. Sometimes I think people think a critical stance means 24/7 criticism, but it isn't. It's just looking critically, right? What's going well and what needs work. And I love that field. I think it's really fascinating. And I was in academia for a long time. And I found that there were a couple things that I kept continuing to get drawn to. And they were sort of the darker themes of our lives, like loss and trauma and suicide and incarceration and war and reintegration after prison or war, things like this. So I earned the nickname Dr. Sunshine at my first academic job because I'm a pretty sunshiny person, but I'm always studying something that's quite dark. So there's a kind of contradiction in that. And as I was kind of working within academia, I found that even though folks talk a lot about wanting an interdisciplinary critical voice, that is also something that people rail against because it goes against the tradition and the education that's currently being offered. And so when I was diving into things like trauma and trying to redefine trauma, I found that a lot of academic spaces weren't really warm to that. And I could find individual clinicians and I would have amazing conversations at conferences with people who agreed with me. But sort of on the whole, the academic project, there was a lot less traction than I hoped. And so I started writing for a more general audience. So I have a couple of books that came out in academic spaces. And then in 2023, I wrote a book called Unbroken, which was for anybody who was touched by trauma or knew somebody who was touched by trauma. And the idea behind that book was to sort of redefine trauma. Like, what if we started with the belief that trauma is not a weakness, it's not a disorder, but that it's actually a sign of strength and function, and that one that can go significantly haywire and cause symptoms, but that at its base, it is a strength response. What would happen then? And then we can kind of peel some of the layers of shame away and start the healing process from a more empowered perspective. And in that work, I started thinking about joy. Because as you know, there's this whole field of positive psychology that focuses on things like gratitude and imagination and joyfulness and things like that. And I found that there wasn't really a lot that kind of built a bridge for folks who were dealing with trauma to get themselves to joy. Because the clients that I was working with, previously incarcerated gang members and folks who were dealing with significant trauma, were pretty resistant to joy. And so I kind of embarked on this project of like, okay, how do we build this bridge for folks who feel skeptical about joy? And that is where that's us up to today, which is the Joy Reset comes out next week. And that's the focus of that book. So similar to Unbroken, it kind of aims to redefine joy, and also build some practices to help people lean into it when they feel skeptical of it or when their nervous systems, frankly, don't have time for it.
I really like that at the end of your preface, you say that you're going to get into some of that heavy, dark, black stuff. And if people get triggered, feel free to put the book down for a while, throw it across the room, etc.
Yep.
And then you used a phrase that's one of my favorites. It's really helped me take my personal work many levels higher is please be gentle with yourself. And I probably say that it's up there in like the top 5% of things that I repeat to patients over and over again. I repeat to friends and family and in the support groups because we are so well trained to be judging and evaluating intellectually and comparing to some outside standard that it's very easy trap for us to fall into beating ourselves up.
Yep. And soaking ourselves in that shame that then becomes like a huge barrier to healing. And so you can cognitively want to be walking yourself down a healing path. But I always say that if you have shame, it's like trying to walk up a mountain with a, Toyota Corolla strapped to your ankle. You can try, but you're not going to get very far.
Well, so the book is The Joy Reset, 6 Steps. What do you want to tell us about the role of joy in healing and what these 6 steps are?
I think one of the things that happens is that we get joy really wrong. It's been defined in this way that is not actually true to the biology of joy. And so when I say joy, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
You're talking to the wrong person because
Okay.
I have that instead of that happy, joy, I have the sense of connectedness and solidness and awareness of your personal safety and
Yep. I love
awareness
that.
of connection to source. So that I have a wonderful, wonderful piece of writing that I was exposed to. It's called Joy in Disguise.
Oh.
And it was published by the Haven Group. Erica Vega is a woman who had been through a number of losses and chose to look at it as though she gets to keep living, she gets to keep going, and so she counts it all joy as the pendulum swings from magnificence to misery, etc.
Oh, I love that. What an image.
I'll
Magnificent.
help you by sending you a copy of that article.
I would love that. So typically when I ask that question, people will say things like, joy is like lightness and joy is fluffy and joy reminds me of, Tinkerbell, like a little
Puppy
fairy kind of
dogs,
floating
yeah.
around. Yeah, exactly. This like very light, sort of airy thing. And then when I ask them, okay, do you have room for that in your life? They say like, well, I mean, not right now, right? Like maybe when I was a little kid and maybe later when I get through this hard year or when I have time, when I'm on vacation, maybe I'll have some time to fit that in. But the truth is that joy and hope are the pillars of resilience biologically. They're profoundly healing and they're incredibly strong. They're not these like flighty luxuries that we should tap into only when we have the time. They are things that we should learn to bring with us into our deepest battles, to our darkest night of the soul, because they have profound healing capacity. Just to give you a glimpse of this, and there's, the neuroscience is significantly complex, as it always is. But basically, we know that fear inhibits joy, right? If you're in a really fearful point in your life or something really scary is happening or you're, actively being chased by a lion, don't have access to the parts of your brain that are the parts that are responsible for hope and for future planning and for feeling joyful and imagining things and whatever. You're just trying to survive. And so we know that fear inhibits hope. What is also true that we learned more recently is that hope actually inhibits fear. So we are wired to have fear when we need it, like when we're actually being chased by a lion. But in modern society, we are not often chased by a lion. Most of the time we're sitting at our desks and we are kind of marinating in anxiety and fear that is not necessarily on par with where we are in the world right now. And so when we're not in danger, how do we learn how to turn those fear centers and then all of the other things they control down? And one of the easiest ways to do that is to practice very kind of easy exercises that enable you to notice and imprint joy in tiny little ways in your daily life. And doing this, I've actually had a really kind of, I want to say non-characteristically, but I've certainly had hard years before. This has been a really hard year, just personally. It's a hard year in the world. We're going through a global hard time. But then I've also had a series of things that were unexpected that happened this year that this book comes out about joy, right? And so one of the things I've been doing is actually walking the walk. And in the beginning of the year, I promised the World Wide Web via social media that I was going to do this practice that I do called Tiny Little Joys every single day of 2025. And I was going to take whoever wanted to come along with me. But every single day I was going to make a video, imprinting one tiny thing in my life that gave me a spark of joy. And I was, I think, hoping that it was going to be an easy year, and it isn't. It isn't. It's a hard year. And so the benefit of that, the gift of that, is that I'm getting to see in real time, how
The benefits
impactful.
of focusing on
Exactly.
joy, right?
Right.
In the middle of your not so easy year.
Right, exactly. And this is another thing I think we get wrong about joy. We assume, like, if bad things are going on, we need a big joyful thing to kind of counter it, right? It's like a dent in your car. If it's this big, then you need to bump it out with something that's this heavy. And that's not true. Joy is something that when we engage with it actually gives us a more realistic worldview, because since we have a negativity bias in the brain, when bad things happen, we start to see the world as a bad place. And the world is a scary place, right? But it's not wholly one thing or the other. And so when we do something like practicing tiny little joys, we are just making sure that our worldview is accurate. It's not the case that, a sip of coffee is going to heal the fact that I had a friend die, right? But it is that I see that they coexist. That's so important.
And as you say, that the evidence is you can't be in these two states at the same time, right? So, yes, fear will inhibit hope.
Right.
And yet, building hope and focusing on it short circuits the fear.
Yeah.
The other thing is, as you were talking, I thought about fear and a definition for it. So many times we get into these discussions and we aren't even defining the word we're using. So we're assuming that people know. And so I talk so much to people about the idea that there's this visceral response that my system can generate when it believes I'm in some form of serious threat. And we commonly talk about it as, fight, flight, or freeze kind of a response. But there's also the stress response leading up to that.
Yep.
What I try and talk to people about is the idea that if I'm sitting with thoughts of fear of something, that's not natural.
Right.
That's not the reflexive response to keep me safe in a dangerous situation. That's me spinning in a negative thought that's been programmed into my mind. As you mentioned, this negative bias.
Yeah.
And so if we can separate those two and understand that if I engage and give value to my negative thoughts that produce this sensation of fear, or that when they're paired with my physiological sensations, I label it fear.
Right.
If I can recognize that if it's not happening right now, those thoughts are false, and I don't need to keep pouring my mind energy to them. I could choose to pour mind energy into, for instance, hopeful thoughts or joyful thoughts.
Right.
Then I break the cycle and I experience different internal, what they call interoceptive sensations.
Yeah. And I think we don't realize that we have that kind of control over our lived experience, that you can turn the knobs up and down on fear and hope, because our emotions feel so compelling sometimes that we believe them without inquiry,
But well, we've been programmed to believe them, right? And we're
Right.
living in a culture that says what you do up here in these frontal lobes, that's the most important thing.
Yes.
By the way, just forget everything below the neck and all the feedback that might be available there.
Right.
Because that's all bad and that's useless and it'll just distract you from just get the right answer and put it
Right.
on the test kind of thing.
Right. And by the way, the job of the frontal lobe, if you're doing it correctly, is that you manage all this stuff underneath your neck so that you never feel it. That's enlightenment in the modern picture, I think. And it
Oh my
sets us
God.
up
Well,
for total failure.
I hope you're not spreading that because that's not a good idea.
No, but I think society teaches us that, right? Like I'm kind of obsessed with there's Foucault wrote a book called Discipline and Punish, and in the very first chapters he talks about there's a section called Docile Bodies, about how we are taught from like almost literal day one of being on earth to be docile and to control our bodies and the expressions of our emotions and how damaging that is. And in fact, he kind of relates it to, it's almost like a prison. We're taught to live in a prison for our whole lives. And I think about that all the time because it's just so evident in our, think about all the embarrassment and shame adults feel when they have the audacity to have an emotion in front of another adult.
I'm with you. I get it. He's taken to a bit of an extreme, and you put the two together and say that that's enlightenment. I've never labeled that as enlightenment.
No, I wouldn't say. I was being 1,000%. I was being
Yeah.
kind of cheeky. Yeah.
The true enlightenment is the ability to be aware of all of it and use it as good information. We are living in a very unhealthy culture that is over-reliant on the intellectual and what they call the rational. I'm trying to come up with the name of the woman I interviewed not too long ago who wrote the book on embodied code switching, and it's just beautiful. Yeah. And she's got a multicultural background, and so Native American, Pueblo, and maybe French and Brazilian, or Italian and Brazilian. It's just so she really went through, as she went from one part of her family to another, these huge differences in the way people have their personal space and comfort level of volume and, rate of speech. And so she wrote a beautiful book about being able to embody awareness of this code switching that we all have to do as we move from one environment socially to another.
I love that. I'm gonna check that out. I think we inherit these embodied practices, and again, we don't often think about them because we've inherited them, right? They're just sort of second nature. But then when we stop and gain some awareness of them, kind of everything changes. Going back to your point about fear, I think that was so well said that, like, sometimes we have an adaptive thing, a mechanism in the body, fight, flight, or freeze, as you mentioned, that becomes maladaptive in the wrong situation. So when you're in a different context, when you're sitting at your desk and you're not actually in danger, your body is then having this incredible stress response. All these hormones are coursing through your body and changing your physiology based on something that isn't currently happening.
Right.
And so Russell Carr said that
we burn ourselves out by staying at that level.
Right.
Russell Carr said
he was the head of Walter Reed for a long time, and he said that traumatized folks are the only people who are living in two times at once because of this, right? You're sitting at your desk, you cognitively know you're here in this moment and that you're safe, but there's another part of your body that is still at war. And so your physiology is experiencing this incredible disconnect between the past and the present, which puts an incredible amount of weight on your body.
Well, and because you spend so much time when that's happening in a decreased functioning of your immune system response, that it wears the body out faster.
Yep.
The author of that book is Marcia Bonato Warren. It's Marcia, but it's Marcia is her pronunciation. Bonato, Bonato Warren. And the book is titled Movement and Identity, Multiculturalism, Somatic Awareness, and Embodied Code Switching.
How cool.
The idea that we can learn, I'm not sure you're aware of it, but there was a documentary, it's about an hour long, titled Stress, Portrait of a Killer, which talks about exactly what you're talking about here. A lot of research is revealed about how when we put ourselves in these levels of stress that approach fight or flight, and we stay in that space for an extended period of time, it's detrimental to our physiology as well as our mental, emotional health.
Yep. And think about this, right? So let's say you're like, okay, you watch this documentary, which I wrote down and now I'm going to go watch. And you think like, okay, crap, I'm stressed and this stress is eroding all of my systems in my body and it's causing inflammation and my hormones are going haywire, which is affecting my metabolism and all these things. Now what do I do? And you've been in this space of hypervigilance, right? And now this movie has made you feel maybe even more hypervigilant. And now what do you do? And so the science will say, well, okay, if you bring in some healing things like hope and joy, then you can counteract some of that inflammation on your body and some of that stress in your body. But you're asking a hypervigilant system to put its guard down. And so you can have a snapback effect where cognitively you're like, okay, let me welcome joy into my life. But then when you actually try to do it, your body rejects it because it is used to being hypervigilant and it has learned if we are hypervigilant, then we are safe. So we must stay hypervigilant. And joy is asking me to put my guard down. Joy is asking me to calm down and trust. I can't do that. And so then what is the answer?
Well, and what you're talking about is that the individual who has responded to trauma in a way that develops hypervigilance to stay safe and survive and then stay safe, that individual has literally learned to define, we were talking about defining words earlier, that individual has learned to define safety as my being in a state of hypervigilance.
Exactly.
So the safety has nothing to do, in truth, with the external situation. It has to do with the definition the person's operating under, which says, I'm only safe when I'm hypervigilant.
Right.
And if you ask me to lower my hypervigilance, and if you're a therapist, say, in a setting, I may be able to do it for you a little bit, but then as soon as I leave here, that bounce back, right? That rebound is going to flood in and
right. And so that's why we have to build a bridge. And so in the Joy Reset, I identified 6 thieves of joy, and hypervigilance is number 1, right? Hypervigilance is going to try to trick you into letting go of joy. It's going to tell you that it's not safe. And that hypervigilance, like you said, comes from a place that makes sense. It's a learned thing. We don't arrive here hypervigilant. We learn to be hypervigilant because of experiences. Chronic stress, trauma, lots of different things can cause that. Even just, I think, the kind of climate right now in the world, it's hard not to be hypervigilant about the news. Even if you're not someone who kind of tends to be that, or maybe you don't have a trauma history, you might find yourself more hypervigilant now. So if someone comes in and says, look at this funny little thing that I just saw on TikTok and I want to show you this, you're going to say, or you're going to at least have the impulse to say, no, not right now. We need to stay in this place. So then the question is, okay, how do you then build a bridge from the place of hypervigilance to let in joy? And I think one of the answers is to scale way down. I think sometimes we set ourselves up for failure, or at the very least, incredible frustration when it comes to healing, because we say, well, I will know that I've healed when I can feel joyful every single day. Right? When I can let in a huge joy and I can celebrate it and I don't have any kind of negative or, middle negative feelings about it. And the truth is that that's not really realistic. And what's much more sustainable and will work right away is if you scale down and try to, kind of give yourself a tiny dose of joy and then go back to hypervigilance, because it's not that that's necessarily wrong. It's that that's the state your body is currently in.
So you're defining scaling down as what I would call lower your expectations, right? So lower the bar and then in increments work your way up.
Yes. Yeah. Or, Peter Levine might say titration, right? Like
exactly.
This is,
right.
Yeah. Or pendulation. You kind of swing into the good feeling, you feel it a little bit, and then you let yourself go right back to your hypervigilant state, rather than saying, there's something wrong with me because I'm hypervigilant and I can't feel joy. And so I'm going to try to approach this from a shame perspective. And, then again, you're back to that situation where you're trying to hike with a Corolla attached to your ankle. It's not going to work.
Yeah. And it can, we can make progress if we, use a process like desensitization or small enough chunks and give up the habit of comparing ourselves to some idyllic, healed, healthy, strong, joyful model,
Right.
and
Exactly.
just use as a reference point, where was I a week ago, and where was I yesterday, and where can I be today that's a little bit more flexible or comfortable?
Yeah. And also acknowledging that it's not a linear process kind of at all, right?
Right.
So you may be in a situation today where you are a little bit less resilient than a year ago because you've had an illness and you've got a financial stressor and there's these other things that are going on in your life. I think sometimes we try to assess ourselves on this linear path and say, like, I hear this from clients all the time. They'll say, I thought I had healed from this. I thought I was over this. And it's like, well, what does that mean to be over something? That you'd never encounter it again, like, or that when you encounter it, you feel resourced enough to recognize it and cope maybe a little bit better than a year ago.
That's what I'm encouraging people to do, to use that thought, "Oh, I thought I was over this," or "I'm so glad I'm over that."
Right.
I coach people to use that as the signal to start doing some more work on that issue, because
Oh, I love that.
it's never, if I had an issue with something, I mean, I was in grad school, the first big thing I remember that I didn't like that they taught me in grad school is, once you identify your core issues, "Oh, no, by the way, Tim, this is a core issue for you." They said, "Once you identify your core issues, you will take them with you to your grave."
Right.
There is no question about that.
Right.
The only question that remains is, will you admit it, own it, and work on it so you get better and better at dealing with it, or will you start to blame it on others when it comes up?
Right. And react out of it instead of kind of soften to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
instead of understanding that it's a response pattern you developed that helped you in the past, and it's not necessary to keep doing it now. You've got other ways to respond to it now, but you're
Mhm.
still having the urge to go back to the old response pattern.
Right.
It's okay.
Right.
There's an education for me in my responses.
Yes. Ooh, I
And
love that.
and and if I, you know, Guy Finley says the lessons we need to learn in life right into our lives on the back of the events we don't want. And the importance of the lesson is directly proportional to how much I do not want this event.
Mm. I've been thinking so much about, there's this poem by Rumi, The Guest House, where he talks about inviting each emotion in,
Right.
even if it's sorrow, even if it
Right.
kind of robs you of everything in your house. And I think that imagery is really powerful, of imagining, okay, anxiety, that's not someone that you want knocking at the door, but they're here. So what would it look like if you invited them in and had them sit with you at the table? And it
Right.
just changes the whole thing. And it
Absolutely. And it changes it in so many ways. I mean, in one
Mhm.
way, now I'm not just my anxiety. I'm
Right.
stepping back and observing it. And
Yep.
I'm offering it some kind of space or comfort.
Mhm. Right. And you're assuming that it has something to say
Right.
that's worthy, right? And it might not be that it's reporting reality accurately, right? But that it
But
is asked.
it might be educating me about negative beliefs I downloaded in the past that aren't
Yep.
necessarily true.
Absolutely. Did you see, Inside Out 2, that movie?
I haven't seen 2. I saw the
Oh,
first one.
2 is wonderful, and this is not a spoiler, but they do a really beautiful job with these kind of really difficult neurology things, like memory formation and retrieval and memory consolidation and things like
Memory
that.
reconsolidation, yeah.
Yeah, and they talk about the way that a belief gets formed, and they have this really cool image for the way that an experience can turn into a belief about yourself and how that then kind of becomes part of yourself unless you go in and intentionally do some work around it. But those false beliefs, I mean, any belief that we hold about ourselves is going to be motivating our behavior in ways that we are conscious and not conscious of. But the false beliefs are especially tricky. So maybe anxiety is knocking at your door to alert you of a false belief.
Well, and what I tell people is, and I have a list of bottom line observations I give people in a first or second session, and the 10th one is the last one to earn its way on the list says, if I have a negative thought about myself or someone else, or a negative emotion active in my mind, I can instantly know three things. The first one is it's a lie or based on a falsehood. So even if I have a tremendous logical structure that all fits together that shows me how this is the truth, on closer examination, I will find out that that logical structure is based on a false premise. So it'll fall apart. The second thing I can know is this is not about what's going on in the moment. This is an old tape playing in my mind. Maybe something that the bullies imprinted in me or my parents or whatever I heard from family arguments. It's not about the present moment. In the present moment, if I stay right here, I don't have terror and fear, and I'm right in the moment. And the third thing I can know is that if I let myself sit and spin thinking about this, if I speak or act from it, it's just going to make my life worse, not better. I tell people it's akin to throwing garbage on the buffet table right before dinner. It does not enhance the dining experience.
No, it does not. I love that. I love that. That's such a useful framing because it is so logical. I think that one of the things we run up against, and I see this with clients all the time, is they have a ton of evidence to support their negative beliefs because they've been spending decades gathering, right? That part of themselves is gathering all this data that says
And building the logical structure. Yeah.
exactly.
Building the
Yep.
logical structure.
Yep. Oh,
Yeah,
you'll love that movie. You should watch it because the visual is very cool around that.
I watched the first one many times and referred patients to it and
Mm-hmm.
family and friends to it. So I will look at that. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm
So
writing this down.
you're talking about how my belief that I need to be hypervigilant to stay safe and the therapist or the world that tells me, oh, you're being silly, you don't need that, relax, there's nothing dangerous here, that we need something to kind of bridge to get from one state to another.
Right.
You want to talk a little bit more about that and the things that you found help people make that bridge?
Yeah. The first I want to, if it's okay, spend another minute talking about that disconnect because I think that's so important when you're having this experience and everyone is telling you like, oh, well, you don't need to be hypervigilant. Like, that's like telling somebody to calm down when they're in the middle of a panic attack. Like that has never worked. It's not. And part of the reason it doesn't work is because you don't meet the person where they are, right? When someone is in a hypervigilant state, they may even be saying to you, I know that I don't need to be here and I don't want to be here. And I think it's important to say, but okay, you are. And the fact that you are comes from a kind of intelligence and wisdom in your system, that trauma response that imprinted that and took it on as the job, right? We have to be hypervigilant to be safe, was trying to protect you. And so we can talk about adaptation moving into maladaptation, but I think it's really critical that we start with the understanding that the state that you're in makes sense. There's nothing wrong with it. It may not be the way you want to live, but it makes sense. It's there for a reason. Because I think when we know what is driving us, then we get a lot of information. When we can look at that without shame, we get a lot of information about what we actually need. And so someone who's hypervigilant, they can practice gratitude lists from positive psychology all day long, and it's not going to have an impact because you're not dealing with the hypervigilance at its core. You're not meeting the person where they are.
Yeah, and you're not changing a feeling state.
Right,
You're just
exactly.
staying up here at the intellect.
Exactly, right. And there's no felt sense of that, right? And so I think that building a bridge requires first figuring out like what land are you on right now? And then what land do you want to get to, right? When you think about joy, when you think about freedom or peace or safety, what does that look like for you? Have you ever felt that in your body? And so something I do often very early on with clients is to have them do like a joy timeline where they think about what was the most unabashedly joyful thing in your life when you were 5, or 6 or 7, somewhere around that age. And they'll say, oh my gosh, riding my bike in the neighborhood with my friends. And you can see their whole body change as they're talking about that. And then you're like, okay, what about 18? What about 25? And then what about in the last year? How have you felt joy? And I think that does two things. Number one, it helps the person understand that this feeling that might feel very distant from them in this moment is something they have felt. So it is something that's possible. It's within the realm of possibility. And two, it's also a way to start introducing your nervous system to these cues that you had before the trauma, right? So like you felt joy in your body. And so that means you know what your body feels like when it feels safe enough to revel in something. And I think we get so good at naming and mapping out our triggers, as we should. That's important. We don't talk a lot about, like, what does my body feel like when I feel safe? What happens to my heart rate when I'm having a great, engaging conversation with someone who's listening? Like, what does it feel like when I'm really excited? Where does that energy sit in my body? Things like that. So I think introducing people to these feelings that may feel foreign is a good start. And then it is beginning to develop and work with practices that are small enough that your nervous system doesn't react negatively to them, and repeatedly doing that so that you can kind of condition yourself to have the feeling without the fear that the feeling is going to kind of take away the tools that got you here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's this individually focused. And so there's not like you can't just map this out and say, here, step 1, step 2, step 3.
Right.
Because for some people, step 1 needs to be 10 levels,
Right.
step 0.01, et cetera, or
Right.
100 levels. And
Right.
other people can jump right to the 5th step and go, wow, that's great. Thanks for introducing me to this.
Exactly. Right. Right. So that's so important to meet them where they are, because we're all in a different space. So we can sketch out these frameworks that help people navigate, and these, signposts that help people tell where they are, but not everybody is going to be at the same place. And so, yeah. And then figuring out like what thieves are active for you, what is getting in the way of your experience of joy. And that is probably impacted by lots of different things in your life, right? It's not just hypervigilance. It can be emotional numbing. It can be a fear of loss. It can be, guilt. That's the one that I'm seeing the most commonly right now, is that, when I go give a workshop or something, the first question right now is, how can you possibly be talking about joy right now? How can I possibly be focusing on joy right now? The world is falling apart. People are dying in Gaza. Like, there are American citizens being deported to El Salvador without recourse. How can you be talking about joy? And I think this is a really good place to talk about the collective nervous system, and that when we are doing these individual practices of healing for ourselves, yes, we are healing our own wounds and regulating our own nervous systems, but also every moment that we spend in a state of nervous system calm is a moment that we are contributing to the collective sense
Right.
of calm versus the collective sense of chaos,
Right.
which is fed by this guilt of like, I don't deserve joy. How dare you feel this? You need to. It's actually your responsibility to, or we won't.
Right. To
This is a
bring it into,
marathon.
to bring it into the physical realm as much as possible, because you're one of those,
Yeah.
whether you realize it or not, your body is an energy system that's capable of bringing that joyful,
Yes.
loving energy, compassionate energy into being.
Or the opposite, right? So whatever you're energetically experiencing is going to ripple. Yeah. That's perfectly said. Yep.
So we clearly have some of the same source material we've been,
Yep.
dipping our fingers in. What's another takeaway that you want people to get from the book, The Joy Reset?
That that's a great question. I mean, the one thing is that joy is coming to you, and it is here. I also think that one of the negative things that we get, and it's kind of dressed up as a positive thing, is people tell us all the time we can't give up hope. Don't give up hope. Don't let go of joy, or what is what I always want to say. Don't give up hope is the worst thing. And I think we need to understand that there are circumstances in life that necessitate that we give up hope. That hopelessness is a feature of human life, and that you don't actually need to believe in hope and joy for them to continue to exist. Sometimes your job and your task is just to hold on, and that's it. That's all you can do. And in that space, asking someone to have hope is too big of an ask. And I think if you can say your task is just to hold on, and when you're ready for it, be open to the hope that shows up and the joy that shows up. because in my own life, and this is true for my clients as well, in fact, I was just talking about this yesterday, joy shows up whether I want it to be there or not. And now that I recognize it more, I see it all the time. And so the first example that I always give is my father died really suddenly when I was 24 on Christmas Day. And the loss was stunning and astonishing, and I had no coping techniques for it at all.
Did you say at 24?
Yeah. Yep. So I was a child, right? Thinking I was
yeah.
an adult, right?
Right.
Living in, this like I'm supposed to be able to get this together. And it's funny, I called a therapist and I said, so I had this loss and I'm dealing with these panic attacks and they're getting in the way of my work. And so I would like to do like maybe 6 sessions and figure this out and then
Fix it.
yeah, fix it. Right. And she told me much, much later, like 4 years later, that she thought like, oh, thank God she called me and like, I hope I can get her to stay for more than 6 sessions because clearly we have more work to do. But in those early days, that acute grief that just takes your body over, right? And you're just, on your knees, I would be lying on the floor of my apartment, just keening, like there was nothing except that pain. And then the light would shift and I would notice a rainbow across the floor. Or there would be somebody laughing hysterically in the street and the corners of my mouth would start to turn up against myself. Like part of me wanted to stay in the grief and that acuteness of it because there's something sort of satisfying in that. But joy showed up anyway. And I think this is one of the things we miss when we define joy and hope as these sort of flimsy things. They're not. They are standing there right next to you in all of your darkest moments. And if you're aware of that, then you will notice it. And I think noticing that and changing the way we relate to hope and joy means that we can have a better relationship because it's like, yeah, I can give up hope, right? Telling someone they can't give up hope right now is like again, back to this thing of like telling someone, like, it doesn't make sense for you to be hypervigilant. Calm down in the middle of a panic attack. Like, well, no, if I'm at the point of hopelessness, I am. So I guess you asked, what would someone want? What would I want someone to take away? That like joy and hope are right there with you, even in your dark night of the soul. And you can give up on them. It's okay. They're going to be there anyway.
The experience of being more solid and more durable than most people are trained to believe they are, right? So the idea that if I have a panic attack, it somehow means I'm fragile. It's never really made sense to me, right? I've got all these years of experience in therapy, and some of the strongest people I know are the people that live with levels of anxiety that go through the roof. And they live there every day, but they still function.
Yeah.
And I've found myself for decades now telling those people, please reevaluate your assessment of yourself as damaged or broken or weak, because what you're doing, you're exhibiting strength that most people will never even imagine because you're still functioning.
Right.
And life is torturous for you this way.
Right.
So, one of the things I do a lot for people is refuse to buy into their definition or somebody else's definition of them as fragile.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah. That was one of the reasons I called unbroken. Like this is not, your emotion is not a sign that you are broken. That's not a thing.
Well, and Dr. Roger McFillin is spending a lot of time these days banging the gong about how we've really mislabeled and pathologized regular human emotions.
Right.
And it's counterproductive at many levels. So,
yeah.
Well, if you take a breath and get centered and think about whatever we talked about for 45 minutes or so, and think, is there something you want to go back and highlight or something else that we haven't even touched on yet about your work or this book that you want to put into this discussion?
2 things come to mind. One, I want you to know that I stopped believing in joy in the middle of writing it. And I almost gave the advance back and canceled the project. That's the level of like, I can't in good conscience write a book about joy because I was not believing in it.
You weren't feeling it, right?
I was not feeling it. One of my closest, dearest friends was diagnosed with glioblastoma like 2 months after I got the book contract. So I was in the heat of writing the book and he called me one day and he was like, I can't feel it. Like, what do you do when you can't feel it? And he's dealing with this terminal sentence and this, in a young, beautiful, unfolding life, it just felt so senseless and relentless. And I stopped believing in it. And again, going back to what we were just talking about, joy kept like finding me. Yeah, I was going to free myself of this project and not have to worry about this. And now here you are and teaching me that you're still here. So there's that thing. And then the second thing is that there's a chapter on suicide. And I think that it's important to talk about, if we're going to talk about the light, we need to talk about the darkest darks that we find ourselves in. And that is a topic, it almost didn't make it into the book. There's a lot of nervousness around that topic in general, as I'm sure you know. And I think that makes it even more important that we talk about it and are aware that sometimes the circumstances of our lives are not things we can carry and that we don't all survive this. And we need to look at that impulse before. Yeah.
We don't all survive it in the physical sense.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
Well,
And
I'm glad you did put it in there.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know something of the challenge for bringing out the more taboo or difficult topics. So Andrea Gibson just wrote a piece and put it out in her email about speaking the truth. Like, this is the hardest winter she's ever had, and her parents were coming for a visit. And she thought, well, should I just put on my bright face like I always do for them? And she thought, oh, maybe this time I'll tell them the truth. And we all know, if we've been through it, what it leads to is greater intimacy and connection when we tell the truth about the hard stuff. Yeah. We don't try to polish it over or pretend it's not there.
Right. Or hide it, because that's when it gets unwieldy, right? That's when it becomes the monster under the bed, and it gets bigger and scarier and more intimidating. But if you can bring it into the light and talk about it with someone safe, then you can look at it, try to, dissect it, figure out what's going into it. What is it telling you? What do you need?
And at every level, if I try to keep a secret, I'm pouring an equal amount of my mind energy into the conclusion that I'm damaged or broken and unlovable.
Right.
And if the person I'm hiding this secret from finds it out, they're going to either attack me or run away from me.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. James Pennebaker was just on a podcast called The Good Life Project. He's done a lot of work on free writing and narrative therapy. And for a good amount of the conversation, they talk about how corrosive secrets are to the body. Again, going back to this stress, this silent killer. It's kind of amazing.
So you had one thought you wanted to put out there, which was about including the dark stuff like the suicide. What was the other thought you wanted to bring
up? The other one I had already said too. That was the one that I gave up believing in hope while I was writing it. I didn't believe in joy in the middle of the project. So I think the reason I want to say that is because you will have times in your life where you stop believing in joy. That's okay. That's part of the arc. What I ended up doing in the book is just writing a chapter about what happens when you don't believe in joy. What do you do when you don't believe and you can't feel it? So, yeah.
Sherry Ann Tom, Tom, wrote a book titled The Call of Cancer, A Loving Pathway to Wholeness, Healing, and Transformation. And she's somebody who's had either 4 or 5 diagnoses of cancer, and just a wonderful book about using life as it comes up, like the Guy Finley thing. Here's another lesson for you. Here's an event you really don't want.
Right.
And that means because the lesson is in that event. And as Guy Finley says, if I resist the event, I push away the lesson. Resistance is the lesson stealer.
Yeah. I love that. I'm going to check that out as well.
Well, thank you so much for being willing to share this time with us and for the work you're doing. And I look forward to getting a copy of that book and adding it to my repertoire.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It's been lovely to talk to you. I have a bunch of things I'm going to use. I'll quote you, I promise, but I'm stealing a lot of your tools.
Well, no need to quote me, but if the idea is good and put it out there, getting the good ideas out there is far more important to me than having my name attached to them. So,
right.
So I thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to reading the book soon. When's the publication date?
May 13th.
Okay. And if people want to reach out to you, how do you prefer to have them contact you?
They can find me on social media at mc.phd, and also my website is alchemycoaching.life.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Dr. MaryCatherine McDonald is a Ph.D. researcher, author, and trauma specialist with over 15 years of experience. She has written extensively about trauma, grief, and the power of the human spirit to heal. Through her writing, courses, and coaching, she helps people reframe trauma from a strength-based perspective and reclaim joy after hardship. Her latest book, The Joy Reset, explores barriers that prevent us from accessing joy and how to recalibrate in order to welcome back positive emotions. When she's not working, she can be found dancing in the kitchen, walking in nature, or helping others rediscover their inner light.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.